Well, first, good evening, and thank you for trusting me to come out and listen to me for a little while. We're going to tell some stories tonight. As you can see, we're going to go way back and bring you up to 1855. The first part here, the reason we started part of this was Cochranton on April the 5th, which is Saturday, will be 170 years old as a borough. That's our incorporation date. So I'm going to take you back before that, and I'm going to quit somewhere around 1855. And I'm going to tell you how about the incorporation and that, and some of the things that went on. So I'm not going to be telling stories from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I'm going to be in the 1800s. It's in sections a little bit, and if you want to ask questions, it's probably going to be easier for you to kind of get my attention in that section and ask the question. Because if you get way into the back, we might have to go back to get a slide or something. So if you have a question in those sections, please, raise your hand or somebody will recognize you and we'll see if I can answer those questions for you. Okay, all right. When telling any kind of story, it's often best to start at the beginning. For the community of Cochranton, the official beginning, I suppose, is the incorporation of the borough in the 1800s. In a larger sense, quite a bit had to transpire before we made our way to the 5th of April in 1855. I'll try to shed a little light on those events and individuals that have affected our past. Little written record exists of their accomplishments or failures, but drawing upon the other sources, we can get a sense of what they are. Bob's going to watch. There we go. This should be recognizable to everybody. French Creek. French Creek, the waterway, was a pathway to our community. The creek not only served as an early mode of travel, but an important source of survival. Within its banks was a source of water and food. There is no doubt that the early Indians had a name for it, but we don't know what it was. It as the Riviere aux Eaux from the early French explorers. The streams, meadows were home to the bison. Those heavy, shagged beasts remind the French of their own hoofed cattle and labeled the waterway to reflect their existence. So that would actually mean Cattle River. By the 1700s, much of the bison population had been eliminated, and when George Washington made his expedition, he referred to it as French Creek, due to the French presence in the watershed area. We do not want to underestimate his part in the settlement of our region. Dedication ceremonies for Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission marker, proclaiming it as importance to Pennsylvania history, and many of you were probably there. And that's George Washington and Christopher Guest. They visited us that day. The research of the archaeologists is our method of reaching back to discover possibly Cochranton's first community. Hidden several feet below the fertile farmlands of local landholder Percy McFate was evidence of human existence that dated back to before the European visitation to the area, the late woodland period, 1400 AD. The archaeologist is quick to point several environmental issues that help pinpoint the ideal location of our woodland settlement. The native village, positioned high on a bluff above the floodplain, faced towards French Creek. A large cleared meadow extended to the edge of the creek. This meadow, probably burned off by the natives, provided extra features in enabling the natives to survive. The meadow acted as a fertile farmland for crops of corn, squash, and beans. The open area known as a killing zone for the natural game, and as well as a chance to harvest fish and shellfish from the waters of the creek. This large clearing also provided a mode of protection against intruders. The rear of the camp was surrounded by a series of swamps that made the bluff a safe haven for the nomad tribe. A natural salt lick located below the ox barn was a natural draw for elk and deer. These are pictures from the excavation that was done in 1938. This is all that I have, but it just gives you an idea of how the work was done. WPA had men with shovels. To start off with, they took off about 2 foot of the soil by shoveling it off. They spent the day cleaning it off. And as they would clear it off, they would get down to where you can see the post holes. Now, in a couple of the different photographs, You can kind of see how the dark spots end up being where the palisades are put in. And here they've outlined the whole thing. Now this village is a circular village which had a palisade around it. Now it wasn't so much as to protection against other Indians, it was against wildlife. So as you look down through there, we're going to be able to explore this a little bit farther. Professor Schoaf, kneeling in the native village palisade, their later work revealed that they had been a past site of other villages, probably leading back several hundred years. The natives moved up and down the creek and into the area as game declined or weather conditions changed to make the site unhabitable. The palisades served as protection against attack against animals. The dig would also reveal several adult and child burials. The natives were buried in a crouched or fetal position. Some were covered with simple stone tools and pottery. Who were these people? When we talk of the Indians, we often want to know what tribe, what people. These remains are of a nomadic tribe that can only be followed by their historic digs in the tri-state area. They are identified by their pottery and with the changing styles, somewhat of a timeline of their existence in the region. Archaeologists have been able to connect them with either prior or afterward to any unknown peoples. So they have been called the McFate people in recognition of having settled in French Creek watershed in Cochranton. The artifacts from this dig and final re-examination in the 1960s are now housed in Harrisburg at the Pennsylvania State Museum. Again, you can see the palisade the way it was and the huts throughout. Each one of the huts had a burning pit in the middle, which sustained them for their livelihood, for their food. You can see they've eliminated all the firewood and stuff around it, again, to give them more protection, also that hunting area and a growing area. Some of the shards of pottery are quite unique, and we went to a couple lectures that they went for about 2 hours on the pottery, so we're not going to talk too much about the pottery and the arrowheads. Another interesting story emerged from the 1938 dig. An ancient map of early Cochranton from about 1820 was shared with Schoaf's team. The map, drawn by early residents and property owner Charles Cochran, made indications of the locations of what he perceived to be a French fort. He believed the natural cover of the marshes and the swamps, the elevated parade ground with its huge meadow, was a reminder of the conflict that occurred in the valley when then a 21-year-old George Washington came calling. He mistakes the site as a location of a fort that was at Fort LeBoeuf. His log cabin was located to the southeast edge of the Indian village. This may have been a small French outpost or a hunting camp for Delaware or Seneca tribes in the 1700s. The map has since disappeared and has indicated the position of homes of nearly 40 residents that had settled within the limits of the borough at the time. An historical marker of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission placed along French Creek recognized the significance of that history. We were talking about before, here's the meadow, here's the large oxbow. If any of you have gone down French Creek, you can see it. Here's where the village laid up across the area. Now that's South Atlantic Avenue today. So those of you that live along South Atlantic, you're not the first ones to live there. The area behind it now is where all the rest of the housing is in Oakland Estates. But that was at one time very swampy, and even when they built it, when my father built the houses down in there, that was an issue they had to deal with, was that swamp. The McFate house is up in the corner, which is where Youngs live today, and where the well is today is where Cochran's home was. Yes? Back. Okay. Well, there was clams and stuff they got out of French Creek, basically, and of course the fish that were there. The reason we know they're somewhat of a clam because when they did the excavation, they found lots of the shells located in the area. This is the same region from an aerial photograph. Well, we're going to go back, Bob, if you want to go. And again, you can see the broad meadow where this is down where the French or the railroad goes today. This is This is before anything was started. Look up in the corner. The long building over here is the H.L. Moore Company. For those of you who live in town, kind of give you an idea where you're at. This part of the town hasn't been examined yet, and this is the field that would be McFaith's, and this is where the site is at this point. This is what it looked like in the 1950s from an aerial view. As the European invasion of the North American continent began in the mid-1600s, the early explorers discovered a highly organized civilization, usually situated along the major rivers. These people were able to adapt to the environment and use the resources in nature to sustain their existence. In the northwestern portion of what is today Pennsylvania and New York, several tribes were found by the early French migration south from present-day Canada. We're going to talk a little bit about the Indians that now you'll understand. The Eries were a fierce, warlike tribe that leaves only their name, Lake Erie, as they were defeated by the Iroquois in around 1650. Historians tell us that the Indian expression of the wildcat, but later reflection points to the raccoon. Plentiful in the area, and from a French account, the Eries killed 900 of them in a short period of time. Old French maps back up the assumption of the tribe. The region on the southern shore is marked Eries, referring to the area as their seat of war, mart of trade, and the hunting grounds of the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. Moving on, the confederacies became the unification of 6 tribes: the Cuyahogas, the Mohawks, the Onondagas, the Onondagas, Senecas, and a tribe migrating from the Carolinas called the Tuscarora. The Seneca, which is we're going to talk mainly about, was the largest of the Confederacy, and their nickname was the Men of the Hills, and they guarded the western front of the region, and they were the most warlike tribe. Evidence of their savagery is told in their epic battle. They annihilated their enemy in a show of dominance, cut the arms and the legs off their dead foes, and displayed them on poles for all to see and take heed. To appreciate their power, one need to understand how they positioned themselves in the region. Their camps were along all the major waterways, allowing them to carry war to their enemies swiftly and control the region by using the waterways as a method of communications among themselves. These are some of the reason that the French wanted to start out with being here in the region. This is some of the hunting areas, and these are some of the things that they were interested in getting. They migrated. The other I should go back. The other prominent tribe in the area was the Delaware. They migrated west from the Wyoming Valley over the Alleghenies to the northwestern Pennsylvania, and they received permission from the Senecas to reside in the area. A major camp was in Carlton area, Cuyahoga town, which many of you are familiar with. The Delaware called themselves Lenni Lenape, meaning real men. And the French referred to them as Loups, or French, which was French for wolves, or the Munsee by the British. Their tribe was selected into 3 sets: the wolf, the turtle, and the turkey. Principal clan of the wolf clan was Cuyahoga, staunch ally of the French. You can see, these are reenactors of different things that we've had to just give you an idea what you thought the natives looked like at that time. Remember, these are Eastern Indians, not Western Indians. They're not living in teepees, okay? They're living in villages, usually a hut of some sort, hunting the area. They go on hunting programs where the Indians will go away into the hunting grounds for a period of time, harvesting game and that, leaving the women behind. And then when they got it all harvested and brought it back, they dropped it off and the women would process it. So there was kind of a give and take there with both of them. This just shows you a little bit how the tribes changed. Again, we were talking about the Senecas. You can see how they're controlling the region. So they're going to have to deal with it in the same way with the Delawares as they have their little section in here. But again, they're getting permission from the Seneca to be here. When the French first came, the idea was to trade with them. The French were very interested in trading furs with them, and they would barter with them for the cooking beads and blankets and stuff. And later on, it was, of course, ammunition, rifles, and that, which they were very interested in. And of course, you can always do a little better deal when you're going to deal some alcohol to go with it. And the Indians weren't very good with handling their alcohol, so a lot of times they were taken advantage of. And the British knew that, and the French knew that. So to get what you wanted, sometimes you had to do what you had. They allied with both the British and the French on both sides, depending on the tribes, and some tribes switched. They were intelligent enough to understand when things weren't going their way, they switched sides. There's no sense in staying with the loser when you can go with the winner, because they want you anyways. And so you would find them firing and fighting alongside somebody, and then 2 days later on the other side, they would be fighting against them. Basically, they wanted the French and the British to go away. This is our territory, go away. Kill each other or whatever, but get out of our area. Well, we know how that didn't end up that way. Let's talk a little bit about George Washington. The old adage of the past was Washington slept here, a way of legitimizing the importance of any particular place. The father of our country must have been quite a traveler to have spent so many nights on the road, but he actually did spend some time in Cochranton. Let's examine his monumental trip to French Creek Valley in the winter of 1753. From our discussion of the interaction with the native populations, both the French and British had an active interest in the region. The French, as this point, pretty much controlled the valley and were in the process of establishing forts along French Creek. They had already established a base of command at Presque Isle and were in the midst of finishing fortifications at Waterford. They hoped to continue downstream and reinforce the hold at the mouth of French Creek at Venango, which is presently-day Franklin. The Virginia Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie decided a British diplomatic mission to the region was needed. He recruited a 21-year-old colonial major named George Washington to lead the expedition. His mission was to be threefold. 1, persuade the French to abandon their conquest of the area. 2, gain the allegiance of the native populations. 3, assess the strength of the French force. That's where it says frontier spy. Why Washington? He was a skilled horseman and surveyor. Probably most important was the fact that his brother, Lawrence, a founder of the group of Virginia speculators called the Ohio Company, looked to benefit if the British crown controlled the region. The French envisioned fortifying the valley with a series of forts, securing a transportation route from Erie to Pittsburgh. They could supply their garrison from Canada and eventually reach the Mississippi River and onto the Gulf of Mexico, controlling the western lands of the American continent. As you can see, this is Presque Isle, which is present-day Erie, Fort LaBeouf, which you're interested in, Fort Malchot is at Franklin, and we're somewhere in between there, and then on down to Fort Duquesne. This is Washington's company. He's going to be in charge, but he's got Christopher Gist, which is a 50-year-old, and he's a frontier and an Indian, and he's been hired by the Ohio Company, so he's going to be kind of his buddy. We're going to work together, although neither one of them, Gist had been here so many times that he couldn't understand why he wasn't in charge and why Washington was. You need to have different people that can talk to the Indians. Washington can't converse with the Indians, so he brings John Davison along because he can talk. He also has another Dutch soldier with some knowledge of the French, so that's going to be his French connection. He'll be able to talk to them a little bit. And then the rest of the hands are people that are going to haul all the stuff. They're going to take all their possessions and that, and they're going to go through the wilderness. Now, you have to remember, Cochranton is... use your imagination a little bit. Cochranton, you can't go up and down any of the country area with a wagon and a horse, because the trees are too close together, all right? So you have to walk on the Indian paths, and you don't just walk wherever you want to, because those paths belong to somebody. And the Indians patrol those, and they take very care. But it's not a path that we can follow, because it's not like we would assume where we're going to just cut it out and go. You've got to have a guide that's going to take you and show you where it actually goes. So that's where we get the Indians involved. Tanashayan is an Iroquoian chief, and we'll call him the Half-King. And another Seneca chief, White Thunder. And these guys are going to go along and be his friend along the line and connect with the other Indians. Gaius Suda, which we'll talk a little bit about, Gaius Suda becomes, at this point, he's a young chief. Or he's not a chief yet, but he's just a young warrior. But he's a skilled hunter. And he's going to go to the point where he's going to supply all the food for the whole group. As a matter of fact, one day he kills, I think it's 3 bear and a deer. So he's pretty skilled at what he can do. So they're going to all get together, and they're going to meet at Washington. Will take them to John Fraser's post at Turtle Creek. Now, Fraser had been at Franklin. And he's of course, he's British, so he gets along with Washington. When he gets to that point, the French have run him off. They've taken him and they've actually taken over his home and taken over control of that part, and they push him out. So Fraser is a good contact for Washington, because he tells him, here's what to expect. Here's what's going to happen when we get down there. So a little bit on, and he's going to go present on down through there. Okay. We talked about those paths. They're going to follow the Venango path, which brings you up through. Here's Franklin, and we're going to go on up through. Here's Meadville. All right. We're going to cut back across. You can see it somewhat mirrors at times along the edge of the creek, but other times cuts cross land to get to that. Washington figured it was from Fort LaBeouf back down to Franklin was 130 miles, the way the creek turns. But if you make a shortcut down through there, you can get there in about half the time. So he's going to travel overland. But you can see how many different tribes are in the area, and they all have their own paths. We talked a little bit before about the Indians when they would attack their foe. They understood. You get on the water, and you can get there a lot faster than trying to go overland. So they would make war on one village or whatever, get their canoes all out and get down through there really in a hurry. And they could have backup. They could send braves back ahead and have more come if they actually needed more. So Washington's going to, at one point, now he's going to walk up there to start with, but he's going to come back this way because he's figured out that that's the best way and the quickest way to get there. Again, different kinds of canoes, different sizes canoes. Basically, the Indian canoe was the one that was mainly used around here. The other ones are used mainly on the Great Lakes and the bigger areas. What was a typical fort like? This is an artist's concept, of course. They're going to palisade it just like the Indians did. Put the fort inside, redoubts on either side to be able to watch out. They've got a killing field along. Again, anybody that comes, this is again an artist's rendition, they've got food on the outside. So this is what a native type fort or typical fort would look like. And what would the guys look like then? Again, these are reenactors. The French on the top, and again, the French on the bottom, their forces and their uniforms that they have. And a reenactment of what the fort looked like. And again, they're all going to be along the creek. They're going to battle when those guys come on their canoes. We're going to be there, and we're going to be ready to battle with them. Go back one, please. Okay. First off, let's talk a little bit. Let's get George up to. Let's get George up there so I can give you the connection where he was at. The Indians. The expedition leaves Franklin on December the 7th. Following the narrow, winding Venango path, they reach the banks of Sugar Creek. They fall trees to cross the raging stream. Exhausted, they camp in 3 camps. The British camp by themselves, the French, and the Indians. When The following morning, they passed through Cochranton. Now, remember, I got confused when I first started this. We're on Little Sugar Creek, not Sugar Creek. Wyattville has Sugar Creek, so that's where they're at. They're down near Wyattville. They fall trees, they go across, and then they pass through between the 7th and the 8th. They're going to walk through and along Cochranton, right? Did they go right along the landing where the bridge is? I don't know about that, okay? They might have been a little bit north or whatever. There's several different theories on that, but he was here. He was close, okay? So he's going to get to Fort LaBeouf, and the first thing he's going to do is he's going to change uniforms. He's taken off the Indian leather vest that he's been wearing, and he puts on his British uniform. And he's going to meet with the French, and they receive him. You know, back then it was an honor to be received by, and they would come in and, well, at first he meets with one of the guys, and they said, well, it's not me. You got to wait for my commanding officer, and he's coming down from Presque Isle. He'll be here in the morning, or in the afternoon, excuse me. And so they leave Washington, roam around. So he checks out the camp. Remember what we said on there, frontier spy. What's one of his missions? Figure out what the French are up to, what kind of strength they have. So he walks around their camp. He counts the number of cannon there. He counts the number of canoes there. He counts the number of men there. And he records this and puts it in a waterproof pouch, which he carries with him all the time, because this is part of his mission. He has to get back. So finally, he meets with the commander, and they say, we're going to have to study this, because they realize that the Indians are there, and they're trying to win the Indians over. So for 2 days, they kind of stonewall him while Washington's still counting cannons and all kinds of things. They're trying to get on the good side of the Indians now. They're applying a little liquor, and they're promising some guns, and they're promising some other things. The Indians aren't going to bite, because the ones that he have with them, they're basically allied to the British. So it's 2 or 3 days before Washington leaves, he sends his men, Christopher Gist and him stay behind. They send their men down, they take the horses, and they start down towards Franklin. So Washington decides the best way for me to get back to Virginia is by canoe. And he's going to get on that canoe, and he's going to come down. It's going to take them about a week to get from, it's wintertime. Maybe I didn't tell you this. It's wintertime. It's December. It's almost the end of the year. So they're going to deal with what kinds of issues that they have with that. Now we'll go to Gayasuda. The young, brave Gayasuda was a skilled hunter and supplied the game to keep them alive. He remained a lifelong friend of Washington throughout his lifetime. His grave, supposedly, is at Cussaloga Town. If you've ever been down there, the little Indian garden in the back, there's a little shed over it. This is an older picture. They did an excavation, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, and there is somebody buried there. Now, whether it's Gayasuda or not, because there's another place that he is supposedly be buried in near the Pittsburgh area. Proceeding overland, Washington and Gist will encounter several life and death situations. A renegade Indian takes a pot shot at him, and he is nearly drowned in the Allegheny River. We are left to wonder how history might have changed. After publishing his report, and along with his hand-drawn map, he will gain national and international fame for his efforts. This is the first introduction to the world to the character of George Washington. So there he is back. This is his map that he'll send. This goes clear back to Europe, and they're interested in it because, again, we want to conquer that territory. The British want it, and so do the French. And that's our Washington and Gist when they visited us several summers ago. But you came to find out about the early settlers in Cochranton, so let's start with them. Following the American Revolution, the United States of America had little cash to pay its debts. They did have lots of land, especially lands on the western side of the Alleghenies. The native tribes that accompanied the land were being forced out of the area by the encroachment of the Europeans. Most of the territory filled with virgin timber and acreage near waterways was very appealing. Two pioneers in the valley of the French Creek were Tunis Ellison and Samuel Hollings. Ellison, one of the early settlers, came as early as 1792. The census lists him among the only 15 families from Franklin to Meadville along the banks of French Creek. He later will relocate near Muskingum, Ohio. His early log cabin was on the western bank above present-day Shaw's Landing. Hollings, located near the mouth of the Conneaut Outlet, had a trading post and a supply outlet for fur trappers in the area. He traded with the Indians and initiated the beginning of a small village. The property was near a former large Indian village which had been destroyed in 1779. This site was also the scene of the last recorded scalping in Crawford County. Donation plot 1291. I don't want to get confused, but 1291, 1292, we're going to talk about those because that's the land that will become where the borough is today. 1291 was assigned to William Cochran in 1808. The 200-acre lot was called Milford when it was deeded to Cochran. On this site was probably the first log cabin. Now, this log cabin was the residence of John Cochran, and was located where the railroad depot used to stand, right across from where the Legion was. So you can imagine them there. He's very close to the creek, and his log cabin is there. He's the son of Charles Cochranton, which we talked a little bit about before. He would settle in 1289, which is the southern portion. That's that portion where the McFate site is. That's 1289. That's what that is. Upon William's death, his parents, David and Jane Cochran, sold the plot to a man named Thomas Cochran. This was one of three 200-acre plots purchased by Cochranton in 1813. Cochran settled on 1288, where he operated a grist mill and sugar mill, and that's where 173 crosses over Sugar Creek, or what we refer to as Smith Mills. At that time, it was called Cochran Mills. And the bed and breakfast used to be out there, if that term isn't familiar for some of you. And he also had another plot in Wayne Township, which was 1294. Now, Thomas will give the southern portion of plot 1291 to his son Joseph. Joseph was a surveyor by trade, and he will lay out the eventual plot of incorporating his 200 acres along with another early settler named John Adams. You're going to see this map several times. This is the only way I could do it to hopefully make you understand where we're at. Franklin Street is where Franklin Street is today, and where it says Van Arsdale and where the creek is, that's Sugar Creek, and that's where the Sugar Creek Bridge is. Okay? Pine Street is where you know where Pine Street is today. Adams Street is here, where the bridge that goes across French Creek, to kind of get you an idea where you're at. This is an 1876 map, and the little names, of course, are with that, and we'll come back to that. So 1291 is on this side. 1292 is on this side. It's not divided square, it's divided at a diagonal. So if I would stand on the Sugar Creek Bridge, and there was some way I could look across where the round church or the United Presbyterian Church is, you would look right through it onto the end of it to kind of give you an idea how the diagonal ran across that. Why did they come? Water power. Cochran Mills, Adams Sawmill, and the flouring mill. Again, we're back to water. Water is very important. Water is the energy, is the substance that's going to be what we, well, the strength of our opportunities are going to be through water. So this is a little establishment. Now we're back out to Smith Mills again, which is here, okay? And then it runs up through. We're going to talk a little bit about the road there, but Cochran's going to use the water at that situation to run his mill. He also has a distillery there. The same water is going to go downstream and operate where Adams is. So let's talk a little bit about Cochran. Cochran was born in 1759, probably in Adams County, which is near present-day Gettysburg. He married Margaret Knox in 1786, and the couple had 13 children. Thomas attended the school of Alexander Dobbins and was married he was a minister, he was married by the minister. The school was located near where the National Soldiers Cemetery is at Gettysburg, where Lincoln did his Gettysburg Address. It's just down over the hill. It's an eatery today. It still exists. He received a classical education and later served as a justice of the peace in Adams County, being appointed by the governor of Pennsylvania. Active in politics, he was a delegate to the First Federalist Convention in Adams County in 1800. In 1810, he purchased 216 acres in Mercer County near what is present-day Shakelyville. This property would later pass to his eldest son, Samuel. Shortly about 1813, he would move to his property on Sugar Creek. He had built a sawmill to start with and operated a grist mill and distillery. There was already a mill there that somebody else had built before, so he's basically taking it over. The area would also become the area's first post office and would be called Sugar Creek. The office, with his first postmaster, John Greer Jr., opened on January of 1828. In 1831, Thomas would become postmaster. Thomas would die in 1839 and is buried in the Conneaut Cemetery. His wife would die in 1860 in her 99th year. Now, John Adams, this is the Adams. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Adams, but first, this is where, if you were standing today and we were looking straight at Lions Park, where the lion head is and where the building is on the corner, this is what was there originally, okay? So this is where you're at. We're on Lions Park now. John Adams. Adams was born in December of 1772, also from Chester County. He was the ninth of 13 children, and his father served in the American Revolution. The family continued to move west, and several of his brothers settled in the Utica, Polk, and near Harrisville. It appears that around 1803, he located in what is present-day Cochranton on plot 1292. He purchased this property from Marcus Hollings. Remember, we talked about Hollings. According to that deed in 1815. On his property, he built first a sawmill and later a grist mill with a carding mill. As early as 1820, he attempted to lay out a village with the mill property as the center of the property. He called the community Greenfield, but it proved to be a bust. He was only able to sell 2 lots. Several other attempts in getting a workable plan followed, but neither one of them worked either. He turned over the carding mill to his son and later sold the grist mill to another Cochran. He and his wife Anna were early members of the Cochranton Presbyterian Church. Anna died in 1854, and John survived long enough to see the incorporation of Cochranton, dying on August the 30th, 1855, and they're both buried in the Cochranton Cemetery. The early sawmill used water from nearby Sugar Creek to propel a water wheel to provide the early power for the mill. That was about 1803. He later would add a grist mill in 1809 and finally a carding mill. These mills would pass to Joseph and Mike and Marley, who would also establish a tannery on the property. So this is the center of Cochranton. All the major businesses are there. And I know we don't have any mills to send you to look at, but there was the undershot type thing was what they originally had because the wheel would boil the water with the waste would come upon it. Later on, they would build and have an overshot because you could see the efficiency changes. So he's going to build a water flow to do it. The breast mill just goes somewhere else. And all the materials and stuff that goes into the grist mill. The grist mill was very important. We're mainly an agricultural type community, and to have the flour ground and whatever. Matter of fact, Cochranton was one of the largest suppliers of buckwheat. Why, I don't know, but that's what it was. And they were nationwide known for it. It was shipped as far as Massachusetts and the south as into the Carolinas and into Georgia. Another shot of the mill, and some of you that are residents may remember Claire Nodler, who worked at the post office and was also very active in the fire department. I think he's about 14 or 15 years old in that shot. The mill will go under many changes. It will burn down in 1846 and be rebuilt. And it continues to operate the mill during the Civil War and later on it will become the Smith Apple in 1865. Hugh Smith, a native Cochranton, had operated the Cochran Mills at Wayne Township. Andrew Apple was from Segertown, and he had been a miller with the Gill and Shidrock firm in Meadville. He moved to Cochranton in 1860. The firm flourished, and in the early 1870s added a 28 by 36 three-story addition, which is what you're looking at, okay? The mill was about half the size of that when they added on to it. They also had a wholesale, and they built another building about where the fire department is today in 1876, and it was for wholesaling their product. Apple will withdraw from the business to run for county sheriff, and Hugh will take his younger brother John into the business, and the name will be changed into Smith Brothers. John dies in a tragic buggy accident in 1905, and Hugh died a year later. The mill will go through a number of different owners through the time period. And finally, on October the 3rd of 1931, a fire of unknown origins completely destroyed the historic building in a spectacular blaze that could be seen for miles. The mill burnt for 24 hours, literally 24 hours. The Cochranton at that time, this is 1931, had 2 hose carts. That was the fire department. They had 2 hose carts and a couple of hydrants. And as you can see, they didn't do a very good job. The thing the fire led to, right here in the corner there, is the chartering of the Cochranton Volunteer Fire Department. Within a week, the Borough Council had met, and the community, with an uprising, says, we need a fire department. This can't happen again. And they'll be chartered the next June. They'll start and get it. So in a way, a bad thing becomes a good thing. So the fire department will be chartered into existence at that point. The mill, after the fire destroys this, it will sit vacant for a number of years. Hugh and Mary Pagan will end up with it, and in 1960, the Cochranton Lions Club will buy the site, which is 13 acres, and they will start their community park, which is there today. This is a little bit about what was going on during the War of 1812. By the early part of the century, the region was still very much a frontier, and a fear of invasion of the British caused much apprehension in the scattered settlements in northwestern Pennsylvania. Independence from England was over a quarter of a century removed, but the young nation was continuing to struggle to be able to survive. In the frontier areas, the real threat of invasion made for the continued need for a local militia force. Throughout Crawford County, each small locale enlisted the able-bodied males to subscribe for service in their local militia. This area was protected by a group called the Sugar Creek Rifle Rangers. They were part of the 16th Division, commanded by Major General David Meade, founder of Meadville. Troops were sent to Erie in defense of building of Admiral Perry's fleet. Perry called upon Meade to send soldiers, and approximately 2,000 were sent to the port of Erie. Perry realized that the appearance of the British fleet on Lake Erie posed a threat to the port city. Hoping the presence of militia would discourage the assault, gave Perry extra time to complete the construction. Now, during the time that all those people were there, this is the Young House, which was the McFate House, okay? We know where it's built. It's up along the edge of where Franklin Street comes in. Now, that isn't where the fort was. The citizens of Cochranton went ahead and built a fort just like the Indians had. And it was similar to being down because on the Charles Cochran area, so it was down again on South Atlantic Street on a raised area. They built a palisade, and at night, all the members, which is mainly the women and a few older men that were there, would gather inside the palisade so they would be protected from the British. Was there ever any British attacks here? No, there wasn't, okay? But it was a good idea, and it made them all feel safe. But this is on the original farm, so this house will not be built until just prior to the Civil War. So we got a village, we got to put it together. As you can see, I don't know if you can see it real well, but it's Joseph Cochran. That's his cemetery stone, and he's buried in the Cochranton Cemetery. So Adams, like I told you, he tried to lay out the town. It didn't work out too good. The only couple lots he sold, when he called it Greenfield, now he wanted the center in the circle is where his mill is. We were just there. That's the Smith and Apple because it's at that time period. The two lots he sold is where the post office is today and the lot next to it. Okay, those are the only lots he could sell. And the streets were going to be laid out similar to that, we assume, but there was no actual plan of that. But he was going to call it Greenfield. And it, again, proved to be a bust. In 1831, Joseph, a surveyor, became interested in dividing the property and eventually approached Adams in attempting to put his original plot together and design on both lands. The plot was developed and several offers are again for sale. Now, basically we're on the same lot again, but he's got different names for different streets. For instance, Smith Street, where it cuts down outside here, was Union Street. Locke Street was where Adams is today. And Market runs along where Franklin Street is. Middle comes down through, all right? And where Smith Street today was called Middle. And the little plots that they sold, they were able to carve out a little area here on the corner. Here's where the corner is, up through almost to where Pearl Street would be about right here. So where Pearl Street cuts through. So they were able to sell a few lots there. They got a few people interested. But again, it didn't go too well. And they were going to call their village Concord. So now, I remember I told you about that diagonal that runs down through. So we're going to get into a situation where we're buying property on either side of the street, okay? So we're going to have to do something consistent here. Log School. Log School is right where the First National Bank used to be, okay, on the front street. I think it's called the Vault now, all right? So that's where you're at. So Log School, 1830-32. Cochran's going to be he's the surveyor. He's also going to be the teacher. A couple other plots, as you can see, I plotted for you. The Presbyterians buy a large pair. On their deed, it's called Concord, okay? The Methodist Church will buy one back off of almost Pressler Alley. It's going to sit back off of where the alley runs down through. That's where it was until they moved to where they are today. And Hyde, she's going to buy one that's going to straddle both sides. And on her deed, it's called Cochranton. So we're going to revise it. Everybody's disgusted. This is a mess. You've got to do something about this. You've got to clean it up. So Cochran says, the heck with Adams. I'm not working with him. I'm on my own side of the property. So he blots off two big areas. He's going to call it Cochran Town, okay? And it's on the same land grant, but he's going to block off these two areas, and he's going to do something with the streets. He's not too sure what he wants to do, but he's done with Adams, and he's done with the rest of these people in town. So when he blocks it off, he's on Locke Street. He retains the name, and here's some of the owners that will buy those pieces of property. Middle Street is Smith Street, okay? This is what's called the revised plan, and it's supposedly going to solve the problem. It doesn't, okay? So they ended up going back upon the incorporation of the borough in 1855. The property appears to have taken in the original shape of the 1831 plot plan. The county map here, published in 1865, establishes many of the current streets and indicates that at the time most of the population was congregated along Adams and Franklin. The first ordinances dealing with the establishment of sidewalks identified both Smith and Pine Streets by their current names. An ordinance, number 40, enacted in 1899, will officially name the streets and the alleys in the borough. So this is, the Civil War is going over. The railroad station is here because the railroad has come, okay? The guys go off in the service, There's no railroad. They come back on the train. Okay? And these are, again, some of the homes. And some of the names, if we could look a lot closer, but the population, what you need to know, is about 250 people as of the end of the Civil War. I talked a little bit about mail, okay? Mail's important. When it was originally called, this is a piece of mail that was sent to our town, okay? Reverend Samuel Smith, Sugar Creek, PA, in favor of Joseph Cochran. Remember Joseph? He just laid out the town for us, all right? Little Esquire there. Cochran, T-O-W-N, okay? It comes in a single piece. It's folded over. It has a wax seal on the back of it. And it comes to Cochran Mills. And they deliver it to there. He comes on, the first mail comes by horseback. They cross over the river, they follow the Indian paths, and they bring the mail in a sling pouch and they leave it at the mill. You get your mail when you happen to show up to the mill and get something done or have something done. Later on, as time goes on, now they've got two horses. They got one horse to ride and one to carry the mail on, okay? Before, he's coming once a week to 10 days. When they get the second horse, they're coming about every 3 or 4 days, okay? As the territory continues to establish itself and people get more interest, now they're going to come more and more often. Eventually, the railroad is going to kind of put them out of business as far as horseback because they're going to come on the train, but they're going to have to move to Cochranton by then. Now, this section here, if anybody lives on the Franklin Pike, there are no pictures go with this, but this is probably one of the most fascinating type things that you could talk about. So we're going to go for a little drive on the Franklin Pike, but we're going to do it back in the 1820s. First off, the Franklin Pike was the Waterford and Susquehanna Turnpike, and it was opened in 1809. It started out to be a toll road, and it was to run from Erie to Philadelphia, and it was to have a stagecoach presence, okay? So we want to start at the top of Ridgeway Hill. Everybody go up out of town, go out like you're going towards Pettus, get to the top of Ridgeway Hill, okay? I'm going to start you there, and then we're going to head down the hill. All right, the top there was Whitman Stand, all right? And that was about where Stout's house is today, the McNulty house, okay? And it was at the top. Now, we go on down the hill, and we're going to get to Cochran Mills, because we've been talking about that. We're down at the bottom. That's where Cochran Mills is. So you could stop and get groceries, and you get your mail, and all those kinds of things. Go across, back up the other side. We're going to go to the Burns and the Hunters Inn. Now, they're scattered. These inns are about 4 to 5 miles apart, and they're all very much the same. It's kind of like the bed and breakfast of today, all right? You're gonna on your travels, you're gonna stay for the night, maybe get a meal. We'll talk about some other things that you're gonna do, but everybody has their favorite spot, so you're gonna go. On way down where the Smith Heath Road crosses over, okay? There used to be a brick house on the corner there. That was called the halfway house. Why is it the halfway house? It's halfway between Meadville and Franklin, okay? Easy to remember, okay? On down farther again is the Reed Place. And I'm not sure exactly where that one is. I could never place that one. But there's supposedly that was a branding pens, where all the branding pens was. Now, each of the inns had a bar, a ballroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a sitting room. So you came in, and normally the ballrooms and stuff were on the second floor, but you came in and visited with people, staying over. Maybe you were on the stagecoach, or maybe you were riding your horse, or maybe you were walking. Most people were walking. And you would spend the night in the sleeping quarters, which were attached upstairs. Each one had their special appeal. Talk about politics. We're not going to, but each one of them were very political, all right? Certain people stayed in certain places. We're creatures of habit. That's the way we are. So if you're a certain, you went there, and you didn't go there, but you went over here. And again, they were scattered out enough that you could get there. See what? We're back to the alcohol thing again. All supplied with ample supply of grog and whiskey. They couldn't satisfy you one way or the other. They got you drunk. So there was no problem. You had a good time regardless. Okay? Now, I mentioned before, it was a toll road. So just below the halfway house was a set of panels that went up with rods that went across it. So every time you came up, it cost you so much per person, cost you so much for your buggy, so much for your wagon, so much for your cattle. So what do people do? We're going to save money. We get up middle of the night, leave early. Toll keeper, he's still in bed. I can get through there before he gets out there. So a lot of people would do that. That was the way they avoided. The stage route was operated by a citizen named Joseph Evans. There was actually a couple of them, but Evans has the most time. As you can see, his route ran from Erie to Phillipsburg, which is down near State College, okay, 160 miles. He carried freight, he carried mail, okay. Let me see, I remember how many, off the top of my head, how many people he employed. He employed 42 drivers, and he also had a stable of 106 horses. He ran a tavern in the 1850s. By the Civil War, was contracting mail. His passing was a distinct loss to the community because he served as the burgess or the mayor of the town in 1863. He was also remembered for his kind-heartedness and the integrity of his character when he died in 1901. Now, we talked about traveling, but we also have commercial stuff going on, okay? A common sight was droves of horses and cattle and sheep, chickens, being driven in herds to Philadelphia to be sold. So one of the drovers, what they called a ride and tie thing, was there's two of us, you and I are working together, so I take the horse and I take off and get way ahead of everybody, and I get to a certain point, I get off the horse and I tie it along the road and I continue to walk. You've been walking all along, and so when you finally come to the horse, then you get back on the horse and then you ride back up, and then we continue to do that. So we don't have to walk the whole way, we share the ride a little bit. Plus, I'm watching the front of the grove, you're watching the back so we don't lose any cattle. Now remember I talked about the branding pens. We would go there and we'd have our brand put on them so that somebody else driving cattle or something wouldn't get mixed up. Just like any kids, near the Burns place, there's a real smooth area that's the best area there to race your horses. You know, if I've got a horse, and so does you, and so do you, we got to find out who's got the best horse. So this is a spot we can take them and run them, because they're on a flat area, plus we're also going to clean it and make it really nice so that nothing's going to happen to our nice horse. For some of you later on, it went to maybe one-room school to Rosedale School. Rosedale was at the top of Ridgeway Hill. Can imagine over there where Stouts is today, with all the hip law coming, when the stagecoach is coming and all these people are coming and whatever, if you're a kid in school, you're supposed to be paying attention to what's going on. You can be distracted easily because when the stagecoach would come, they brought the mail and they also brought news of what was going on somewhere else. Hey, what's going on in Erie? Tell us what's going on in Meadville. What'd you hear about so-and-so? The newspaper comes. So the kids a lot of times would spend most of their time, and for a young man to be a stagecoach guy was probably the best thing you could do. It'd be like an overland trucker today. One little story that's shared with us, and part of the thing I have is about the elephant menageries. They're going to travel, down through to the circus is going to come to town. So the kids get to see the elephant. The elephant spends the night outside the schoolhouse. Again, like I said, the railroad kind of puts an end of all of that. The railroad makes it much easier to travel, more you can depend on it. It's got a time schedule. So the toll road, halfway through, while they were trying to collect the tolls, like I said, everybody cheated. So after a while, the companies that had put stock into it said, the heck with it. We're just going to give them back to the townships. You take care of them. We don't want any part of them anymore. And that's how that is the same. Franklin Pike is basically the same route that it was back then. And to even take you back farther, that was probably an Indian trail at one time, because some of the deeds are actually marked as an Indian trail. Spanning French Creek. Probably one of the most recognizable Cochranton images is the bridge. This is the bridge that was built in 1868. There was a bridge before it. The first bridge was built in the 1840s, or 1825, I'm sorry. And this is what they supposedly looked like. Whitling was one of the photographers in town, and these are his views. This is a colorized version, which he's hand-colored because color photography doesn't exist at that time. Bridge was an iconic way to get into town. Here's what it looked like in its heyday. All the advertisements of what was going on was on the location on the bridge. Also, if you could read it real close there, if I galloped my horse across there, that was worth a $5 fine. In the wintertime, we would harvest ice. There was ice houses along back Station Alley and both there where the ice was stored. And you can see them sawing the ice off and taking up. The ice would be packed in there. This is probably January or so, and the ice would actually be packed in the ground with sawdust and would last until almost June. So if you need a little bit of salt. This version over here is when it's being torn down. This bridge will be destroyed. Well, this bridge will be built after the other one was destroyed by a huge flood. So today, it's part of our logo. The bridge is in the middle, French Creek, and the railroad station surrounding it, which reminds us of our heritage. Let's talk about how we actually became a borough. When you want to be a borough, you have to petition. So you get all the landowners that live in that area to petition to become a borough. What event transpired to unite the landowners to organize and draft a petition to formally organize their lands into a borough is not known. No recorded record of this truly historic event has been found. Letting our imaginations take the lead, we imagine that the citizens gathered in the schoolhouse, or maybe one of the large hotels, or proposed that they unite this village and legally become a legal entity. This would mean collectively building an infrastructure of streets, services, and rules to improve the properties and the lives. They would also have a say in the charting the growth and the development of a place that they called home. Did the decision come easily, or was it met with challenges and questions? We don't know. The only evidence is the handwritten recorded record in the borough's ordinance books. The original document is apparently lost to history. The borough secretary, William Beatty, after copying the petition into the ledger, notes that he has taken from the original as part of the official papers of the borough. The original ruling of the court was recorded by William M. Barron, Chief of Courts, and referred to as the surveyed land to be incorporated and the procedures for the first official election. This was handed down on April the 5th, 1855. The decree was by S.A. Davis, which is found in the Deed Book K, number 2, pages 632 through 633. Now, this is Charles Cochran and his wife. I should say Dr. Cochran, because he's a doctor. Where the First National Bank was, about where the drive-in was, there used to be a tree there. And his office was right there because there's many recounts of him tying his horse to the tree. That's the only reason I know it was there. This is the only one of the older pictures I have of Cochran, and he is the one that will present the petition when they go for it, becoming a borough. And they lived on the corner, just about where Country Fair is today, about where the gas pump is there, just back away from the corner. That's where their home was. Another one of the petitioners was Robert Patton, I'm sorry. And he started out, this is quite an accomplished man. He starts out to be a harness maker. He goes to Pittsburgh and learns his trade. He comes back and he says, well, I can do better than that. I can be a merchant. The building that used to be the Red and White store now, which is one of the little churches here on the corner, he's going to build that and he's going to become a merchant. So he's got the only safe in town. So everybody around the community would say, well, gee, I've got a little bit of extra money. I should take it over. And Mr. Patton put it in his safe so nobody will steal it. So he's one evening working, and he worked very late hours. Matter of fact, he was a workaholic and actually worked himself to death and died. He was only 50-some years old when he died. He's counting the money that he's saving for everybody else, and this is in the 1870s. He's got over $60,000. The light comes on. Maybe we should have where is it? Up, there it is, right there. We should have a bank. So he actually becomes the president of the First National, but later it was actually called the Cochranton Savings Bank when he started it. He gets Jesse Moore, who was a Civil War veteran and which lost his arm, to come with him, and another guy named William Brown, and they're the main contributors. They buy all the stock to start with and open up the bank. So while he's there, he wants the town to succeed, so he becomes very popular in all kinds of things. He's a member of the Borough Council. He's on the school board, okay, which controls what's going on. The French Creek Valley Agricultural Society, which is the forerunner to the Cochranton Fair, is held over on North Street, and he's the first president of that and organizes that. That's like a Crawford County fair. That's not just a local fair. Again, a little bit about him there. He would often spend most of the hours reading. He had what we believe to be a photographic mind. Once he saw it, he would remember it and was able to very much to relate to it. He went on a little bit of a trip into Europe trying to revitalize his health, and that didn't work, and he came back and died when he was 51 years old. The interesting thing here is down at the bottom, his house set in the middle of Pearl Street. Pearl Street did not open to Franklin Street. It only came up behind into the backyard. And there was an alley called Cherry Alley that cut across the back of it. And so when he died, his house was in the middle of the street. So a couple of the borough council guys said, well, we know the widow. We'll go down and we'll just make her a deal and we'll get her out of there. They had to wait until she died. So then Pearl Street was bought and open to the front street. So we're chartering on April the 5th, 1855, which will be 170 years this Saturday. This is 1955, just to orient you. Here's the bridge coming into town. Here's the fairgrounds where the baseball field was at one time. This is where the bowling alley is today. So that's what the town looked like from the air in 1855. But who were the first people that were on the borough council? So our first mayor was James Greer. Do we remember James Greer? Yeah, he was the first postmaster. Okay, so now he's going to become the Burgess, which is present-day borough. And we talked about Dr. Cochran. Daniel M. DeBoer is a blacksmith. Okay, Samuel Martin is a merchant. William T. Dunn, he runs the hotel. And Hugh Smith, we talked about him. He has the mill in that, so he owns most of the property in town. And he's a big deal, as they say. So again, this tells you a little bit about each one of them, okay? The different things that they did. And as you can see, for the most part, they were very active in the community and all the major things that we have today, the school, the cemetery, the council. They just on and on and on and have things to do with it. Cochran doesn't last too long. He dies several years later. Dunn was only here for a short period of time, and he moves on to another place. And Greer is a lonely shoemaker, okay? And that should be 8 instead of a 9. Okay? And we know a little bit about William Beatty. We talked about him. He's the first justice of the peace, so they make him the first council secretary. I love this phrase because it appears, I didn't come up with it, but the most important village in southern Crawford County on French Creek, we're the only one. So we're not lying to you, okay? This came out in the 1890s, and I've used it many times. I'm going to take you for a little tour around town real quick. We're out on the nickel plate, looking back towards town. The white building here is the schoolhouse, which would be where across from the round of the Presbyterian Church is today. You recognize French Creek, of course. Sugar Creek, okay. And coming down from the cemetery, coming into town, the cemetery will be over here. This area is now all wooded, and that's part of the park. Now let's go with the boundaries, okay? The Sugar Creek Bridge. Sugar Creek is the boundary. That's the edge of town. With the exception, there's always an exception, you go across and you go up North Street a short period of ways because the Bells owned that and they were related to the Adamses, so that little jaunt becomes part of it. So it's not only Sugar Creek, but it's that little jet that goes into it. But this is the overhead bridge. We're on Sugar Creek Bridge. We're looking back into town, okay? And another shot of what Sugar Creek looked like at that time. Now, we're in the same position. We moved across the bridge. It's a little bit later. The house right here still exists, okay? And then the gym would be not where the dark house is, but be where the space is. River Street would be just on the other side of that tan building if we were going to go down to the fairgrounds. Everybody with me? You know where we're going, right down the street, okay? Now we're at the main intersection, okay? We're standing underneath the red light. We're looking towards Franklin, all right? This building is 101 gas station. This is the parking lot for the Surefine. We've gone through the intersection. We're a little bit farther down. This right in here about is where you would cut down Pine Street to go to the library. So we're going to look on down the street from there. This little walkway right here, see this little raised area? That's where the Dixon Funeral Home is, okay? They didn't invent that. It's been there for a long time, okay? And the streets across the town. This was kind of the residential area of Cochranton with the businesses lying along Adams Street. This is probably one of the oldest pictures I have. Remember the tree I told you about? This is Dr. Cochran's tree. He's got the horse isn't tied to it and is all. These guys are right in front of the bank. See this little, that's, when the next time you look where the specialty printer, group specialty printer is, you look at the side of their building and you'll see this. That'll give you an indication of where you're at. These guys are going across the street. This whole side of the town over many different locations will actually burn to the ground. Notice the street is dirt, okay? And they're on wooden sidewalks down along the side of it. These buildings, which is from where Pedersen's Insurance is up till here, is about the only section of the main buildings that there are actually skeletons of those buildings tucked in behind those facades. The rest of it has all been burnt down and rebuilt. Okay, we're on the front street. Again, see the little star at the top? We're in the same spot. But look, the street's been made out of brick now. So we know it's after 1908. That's when the brick was laid on the front street. Where the buggy is, that's about where the post office would be on the right side, which is in about where the State Farm, in there about where it's at. That's where it was at. It's maybe a little bit down into the alley. It's kind of because the properties got chopped up a little bit when they redid them. You can see all the porches upstairs. Most of the merchants lived over their business. Okay, so those are all residential up over the top. The building, the tall one where you see the word restaurant coming out, the really tall building, that's the bank. And that's right where the bank is today. Okay, that's the savings bank. Somewhat of the same spot, we're underneath the red light. It's 1955. 1955 is the centennial. Okay, we're at the looking down the main intersection. That's what all the banners are for. And there's our one and only red light. Okay, and that's right where it's at today. Now I'm standing under that red light, and it's earlier because there's no brick street now. And I'm looking up the street. The tall buildings with the 5 windows right in this area, that's where the Borough Building is today. Across from it, you can just see the top of the Methodist Church, the tower. Those buildings on the corner are all now gone. That's where the gas station is and up to where the medical center used to be. On the other end of town, which is the other end of Adams Street, we've just come across where West Street is, and we're looking back up the main intersection. This is where the street is, all right? These are all residential. The business area never came down into that area. The other edge of town at that time was where Wood Street is. Now, you know the town because it goes clear down to on the other side of Carroll's Nursery or where the Our Lady of Lourdes is. Wood Street, that was the end of it, okay? And you went up over, and look how narrow the street, that's a 50-foot right-of-way. And they only need a little bit because your buggy's only about 5 or 6 or 7 feet wide. So you didn't need a lot of street. Look at the board sidewalks. They're all raised to grade because the borough required them to be built at grade. So that's why they're all elevated. Okay, that's why it gets them out of the flood area. I showed you this before, coming down the cemetery. The cemetery now the cemetery was out farther. It's been tucked back in. There were graves here that were moved back in, so the road comes straighter now than what it did originally. When you go back through the woods, I've seen it because I know where to look. I can find the original grade of the road back in there. It's still back in there, but it's only about 10 or 15 feet wide. So who are some of the early businesses? I put this one up first because he owns the property where I am. Where my shop is and where the storage buildings are was Sutley's Sawmill. Sawyers were very members of the community to start with because there was raw material everywhere. The place was all full of trees. So they cut them down and they made all kinds of stuff out of them. This is Mr. Sutley, this is Dan Sutley. And I'm not sure who the workers are, but it gives you an idea what a sawmill at that period of time would have looked like. Fleming's, okay? Where Whitling's is here is about where the State Farm insurance agency is. So this is where the Hollywood Videos place used to be on up through. This was only about 12 or 14 feet wide, which is Fleming's Harness Shop. And this is one of my favorite photographs. The building ran the length of the block, so it was about 125 feet long, but it was divided up into 3 rooms. He was a harness maker, so they're stretching out harness and whatever. But the back room is where everybody hung out. All the guys would come in, to tell what was going on, latest gossip, whatever was in the back, and that's George up there. The Flemings were great athletes. They were great baseball players. So there's a lot of give and take going on here about which team is the best. And hey, you want to find out, we'll just go down to the field and we'll find out who the best player is. So just down the block was a shoemaker. This is Lemuel Wood. And you can see with the leather and everything. And he also does some harness and stuff. The thing about the Cochranton business is if Mr. Fleming didn't have it, he sent you down to Mr. Wood. He says, Lem's got one, go down and get it from him. He'll take care of you. And they were back and forth. There wasn't that kind of cutthroat, if you can't get it, we'll all wait and I'll order it from you. No, go downstream and get it from you. Or if he needed a piece of leather to do something, he'd go down and get it from him. I'll replace it when it comes in. So that's the way business was conducted at that time. Across from where we are tonight, where the parking lot is, this is where Cyrus Miller's carriage shop was. He built some of these, and some of them were on order, but he also sold some other things. There's a sewing machine in here and some kind of an agricultural piece of equipment there. Tucked around the back of it was where Eck Harvey's blacksmith shop was, and this is Mr. Harvey here, and this is Carl Miller's father, Orrin. And this is the customer. We don't know who the customer was. On the corner, we had a couple of hotels. First off, the Schaefer is on the corner of where Rivers or Walnut cuts back across, just below where we were talking about. And it was 3 stories in the 1940s. A fire on the 3rd floor, and the floor was they took the 3rd floor off. So if you go over there today, it has a brick veneer on it, but it's the same building. Okay, and people would come and stay. And they ran quite a good business. They were on the upper floor was where the dining room was. The Jefferson was built, I don't have any early pictures of the Jefferson, because by the time the photography came around, it was a mercantile store. And this would be on the corner where the Surefine is today, where their parking lot is today. and it was a pretty large building. It was torn down in 1958 to make room for a service station. We talked about the bank. Here's the bank, built in 1879, and it would last until 1950, and it would be replaced by the current building. Just on the other side of us out here, where, if we'll test and see how much you remember, where the old haunted house was, that was here in a number, this is where the haunted house was, okay? And it was Philly's Meat Market, and he also had harness and stuff also. And he's got a customer there waiting on his trade. On the corner was the biggest building in Cochranton, which was a 3-story brick built by a woman, Mary Smith. This is called the Smith Music Hall. W.C. Work and Son had their hardware there, and there was her son had a hardware store. Many of you would remember it as Schwartz's Hardware Store, which was torn down in the 1960s. And that's where the Tom's Swap Shop, where the auto parts store is today. It was on that corner. The upstairs had a full auditorium, had a stage on one end, which was probably about as big as this stage. And we also played basketball up there. From 1912 until 1926, we played basketball up there. There were 2 storefronts on the bottom, and these were originally offices, and then they became apartments. Where the hair salon is today, next to McCullough's, this was Brown and Gaston's. Those of you that are old Cochranton people, the little boy sitting in the sleigh, that's Carl Schaefer. And the alley where the wagon is coming out, where the guy's singing wagon, that's McCullough's coin store today. The alley was taken over. Originally, that was part of Cherry Alley. Right up from it, be on the other side, which is where Pedersen's is today, was T.H. Adamson's, and he was the druggist, and he also sold furniture. This area had always been a drugstore, and you can see they're standing on wooden walkways at that time. Up until the 1990s, for almost 120 years, it was our center for, it wasn't the only drugstore in town, but it was the biggest one. Again, we're at the main intersection, kind of looking down into the covered bridge on a cold day, and this is across the street, again, from where the red and white used to be was on the other side of that. It would be in where the W.L. Dunn buildings are today. But this was typical. You came to Cochranton, we had a lot of agricultural people that lived out in the country, and they all came in to visit each other. And so it was good to see each other, and these guys are explaining, and this is actually Gus Stockton, which I'm not going into that. Okay. Education, real quick here so we can get you home. Go ahead. The first school was a log school, built where the First National Bank was. Probably looked something like this. They all were very typical. One big open room. The desks were into the walls, so you sat looking into the wall. There would be a fireplace or a stove on one end. The little children would sit around with blankets and stuff, sit around the bottom. There would be one teacher, and he or she would go around. A lot of times it was a he. Would go around, and you learned by rote, so you recited back whatever. And the hickory switch, if you got yourself into a little problem, there might be a little problem to be. There was also a school, which is interesting, which was very similar to it, built around the same time, which is at the bottom of Homan Alley, which is over where the elementary school is today. It's set on the same location, and there's a little story that goes with that, but not for tonight. What did the kids look like when they went to school? First they went to an academy. There's actually the 2 log schools, another school across the street from where the Presbyterian Church is, one where the library was, and then this building was built in 1884. It graduated its first class at Cochranton High School in 1885, 2-story. Upper room was for the high school kids, lower room was for elementary, or what they call primary. If you lived in the borough, you could go for free. You lived out in the township, got to pay tuition. If you lived way out in the township, you came and lived with somebody in town and went to school, and then you went home on the weekend. If you didn't have the money to pay tuition or board, you maybe brought something in from the farm to trade. So they were bartered, they would sell eggs and half a ham or whatever it was. So we were very obliging to get you in there one way or the other. Of course, just like everything, it burns down. You can imagine how sad those children were. February the 13th, 1917, it caught fire in the middle of the night. The undertaker was out doing his job, and he come back through and noticed it was on fire, got the bells ringing. By the time they got there with their 2 hose carts, that was little late, too much, whatever. The kids all came and went, "Oh, this is terrible." No, they didn't. They went, "Oh, school's over in February." And the seniors went, "We're graduating." And they go, "I don't think so." School was then put into all little public buildings, some of it in the city buildings, some of the churches in that. They actually only missed a week of school, went ahead and graduated on time. They started collecting monies to build this building, which was opened in 1918. I know there's some people here that went to elementary school here, because I was one of them. Okay. 2-story again, 9 on each floor with a gymnasium in the back. Originally built as a big U with no gymnasium, and then the gymnasium was added later. We have to talk a little bit about religion. The 3 early churches, okay? Scotch-Irish population, Presbyterians. First church, again, these are not first churches because they were wood frame, and of course we don't know what they looked like. The Presbyterians built their first wood frame, which was probably a fairly large building which sat on the same location. This one followed in the 1880s. The Presbyterians split, opened up another church. This is where the Christian Missionary Alliance Church is today. Just a few years ago, it was torn down to make room for that. This was the second church on that. There was a little brown church which sat to the back of the lot, but I have no picture of that one that I'm aware of. The Methodists, I told you, started on Pine Street on the alley, a small, long, skinny building. As their congregation grew, they built this one, and they're still located there today, although they're a different name. We're going to take you to one little celebration in 1916. When I originally did this program, it was back in 2016, so it was 100 years, so I wanted to take you to the first parade in town. This is old home days. We're looking down the street again. There's the Smith building on the side. We're looking towards the Sugar Creek Bridge. And we're going to build a big arch over there. This arch cost $20. And the borough paid for that. And the borough guys built it. The council members built it. They decided to have this celebration. It's like 1 year over 50s type year, so I'm not sure exactly what their timing was, but this thing is an arch that fits over there, and they said as long as it doesn't go over $20, you can have it. So they built it, and they had it, and you can see how it looked out with lanterns in it. So we have to have a parade. We have our own marching band. We've had our marching band from 1879. They're going to lead the parade. The interesting thing is most of the spectators are sitting in cars along the edge. The cars themselves have to be in a kind of a special thing, because not everybody in town had a car. Most of the floats are horse-drawn. So we've got the spectators in cars watching horse-drawn floats. So here comes the band up the front street there. They're just about where the bank is today. And I've never figured out what this is. But it was an attraction, whatever it was. And we're not going to go there. So here's your horse-drawn floats, okay? Sponsors by, some of the dairy products and whatever. They are actually sitting right in front of where we are today, starting up the street. This house will be moved so that this theater can be built. This house still exists. It's down on Smith Street. It's almost clear down on the block on the left. My dad was going to high school at the time they moved it. They picked it up and put it on dollies, and they got as far as the intersection of Pine and Smith, and it was time to go home. So they just went home, left the house in the middle of the street. And they come back the next morning and moved it on down the street. So the kids saying, well, there's a house outside, but it's still there, so. And there's, again, the arch, and again, a little bit more of those people in there. We figured maybe their 60th anniversary. And Cochranton Borough, the most important village in southern Crawford County. That's all I have for you this evening.